Now a little bit in detail about the reproductive glands, the reproductive system in boys and girls separately. Let us take the boys first. So in the reproductive system of the boys, the reproductive organ is the testis. There are two testes and they are placed inside a skin sac called scrotum. Why the male genitals are placed outside the abdomen and not inside the abdomen like a female? It is because the testes have to be in a lower temperature compared to the rest of the body so that the viability of the sperms can be maintained. That's the reason the temperature inside the scrotum is around 2 to 3 degrees lesser than the rest of the body. So there are two testes, and from the testis you have on the head of the testis a structure called epididymis, and from the epididymis you have the duct called vas deferens. So these vas deferens go and reach seminal vesicle which secretes the semen, and the sperms are released by the testis, carried by the vas deferens, mix with the semen, and then they reach through the ejaculatory duct into the prostatic urethra. Prostate is an organ which is situated below the urinary bladder. So once this secretion reaches the prostatic urethra, and then it is ejaculated only through the urethral passage. So the passage for elimination of urine as well as the passage for ejaculation is the same in boys. So this completes the cycle of the sperm production from the testis, its travel through the vas deferens, and then reaching along with the semen through the ejaculatory duct into the urethra, and then gets ejected out through the urethral orifice. How does the sperm look like? The sperm structure under the electron microscope shows a head which contains the genetic material which has to be transferred to the ovum, the middle piece which contains the mitochondria, and the tail which helps in the sperm to swim, and that is how a sperm is able to move around. There are millions of sperms which get secreted in every ml of seminal fluid, which is important for maintaining the potency of the male reproductive system. Coming to the female reproductive system. So here we have to see the structure of the breast as well as the structure of the female reproductive organ, which includes uterus, the ovaries and the fallopian tubes, and then the vagina and the mouth of the uterus, which is called the cervix. Breast development starts as a small mound around the age of 9 to 10 years. Usually you will see the development on one side first, and about 6 months to 1 year later the next breast mound can be formed. It starts slowly expanding, and along with it you will also see the areola, which is the portion surrounding the nipple of the breast, which becomes little coarse and also dark in color. And because of the deposition of fat, the adipose tissue around the breast, with the maturity of the glandular tissue of the breast along with connective tissue, this forms the structure of the breast. The glandular tissue is responsible for the milk production and secretion of the milk through the lactiferous ducts, and the milk gets ejected through the nipple. The connective tissue is the supporting tissue of the breast, and the breast takes its contour because of the adipose tissue which gets deposited on both sides during puberty. This is called thelarchy, as we already saw. The second phase is called pubarch, when underarm hairs develop, hair in the pubic triangle area develops, and also the contour of the body, where we say the hips widen in girls because of the peculiar kind of fat deposition which happens in the body, and little bit of muscular tissue development, less when compared to boys. So this together gives the shape and contour of a girl, and this is because of pubarch. And finally, menstrual cycle starts around the age of 12 to 13. If the menstrual cycle starts before the age of 9 years, it is called precocious puberty, and if it doesn't come till the age of 15 years, we should definitely consult a doctor to find out why it has not happened. So now coming a little bit into the details of the menstrual cycle. The cycle usually starts around 11 to 12, and what happens in the first 6 months to 1 year after the first menstrual cycle, it is always irregular. Most of the time it doesn't happen every month. It can happen within 15 days, or it can happen around once in 2 to 3 months. So all these kinds of changes are accepted for the first 6 months to 1 year. And then the estrogen progesterone secretion starts happening in cycles, and ovulation gets established, and that is the time when you expect regular menstrual cycle. So if you take a menstrual cycle, it is, for example, say once in 28 to 30 days. It can vary from 25-day cycle to 40-day cycle based on the family history, the biological changes in that particular girl, and also environmental influence, the nutritional changes or the availability of nutrition. All these things can influence menstrual cycle in a girl. So in a cycle, the first 14 days is under the effect of estrogen, and at the 14th to 15th day the process of ovulation happens, and that is the time when one ovum is released by one ovary. So if it is right ovary releasing the ovum this cycle, next cycle the left ovary will do the same thing. So this ovum which is released from the ovary travels through the fallopian tubes and reaches the uterus. The uterus lining inside is called endometrium. This endometrium goes through thickening and also develops new capillaries, small blood vessels. Along with it is a preparatory phase for receiving the fertilized ovum, which is to form the embryo. But suppose this ovum is not fertilized, what happens? This ovum which is not fertilized will reach the uterus and get attached to the endometrium, but because of not getting fertilized, this endometrium thins out and gets shredded along with the ovum and the blood vessels or the capillaries, and that is responsible for the menstrual bleed. This happens cycle after cycle, starting from puberty till menopause, and that is the time when menstrual cycle stops, and this happens around the age of 45 to 50 years. This ovulation understanding is very important, because any change which takes place during the menstrual cycle, if it is ovulatory cycle, this hormonal changes are happening properly. If it is an ovulatory cycle, then a girl can have inability to give birth to babies, because ovum is the key for formation of embryo. Structure of the ovum is round, and it has cytoplasm and nucleus like any other cell, and it contributes to half of the chromosomal pattern of the sibling or the young one. So the sperm contributes to 23 chromosomes and the ovum contributes to 23 chromosomes, and union of the sperm and ovum will give rise to the embryo, which has 46 chromosomes like any other human being. So next important thing which we have to understand is the structure of the female reproductive organ, which is the uterus. The uterus is a pear-shaped organ. It is placed behind the urinary bladder but in front of the gastrointestinal system, that is the rectum. So it is sandwiched between the gastrointestinal system and the urinary system, that is the bladder. And this uterus has on both sides two fallopian tubes which communicate with the ovaries. So the tubes which connect the ovaries and the uterus are called the fallopian tubes, and they are placed inside the pelvic cavity. From the uterus, you have the mouth of the uterus called the cervix, which is a thin structure through which the menstrual bleed comes out, and then comes the vagina, which is a muscular, thin, very flexible structure, and the vaginal orifice is seen just below the urinary orifice in a girl. And during menstruation, menstrual hygiene becomes very, very important for every girl, because adolescent age already infections are very common, but if we don't take care of our menstrual hygiene, infections can happen in that area and also lead to vaginal secretions. So what should you do to take care of menstrual hygiene? You have to bathe twice a day, you have to keep the genitals clean, wash the areas thoroughly with soap and water. Especially during menstruation, you have to give extra care, and change your sanitary napkins or tampons, whatever you use, once in 6 hours, and keep the area dry, And last but not the least, never to use any cosmetics, perfumes or any kind of deodorants in the external genitals. Male also, hygiene is very important. So taking bath twice a day, washing the genitals thoroughly after every urination, and also retracting the foreskin and cleaning the penis becomes very important to prevent adhesions, that is called phimosis, and also to prevent infections in that area. Face has to be washed repeatedly to avoid infections on acne. So these things become important, common to both boys and girls. In a series on adolescent brain, they found out that radical changes continue to happen in the brain during adolescence as well. Most important of this change is called pruning. You must have heard this term pruning when it comes to plants, right? So what do we do when a plant grows densely and also the shrub takes many roots and the shafts go here and there? We do a process called pruning where we cut short the plant so that we get a proper appropriate growth of a plant. In the same way, the process of pruning happens in the brain during adolescence, where the unnecessary grey matter neurons are cut off. For this we need to know a little bit about structure of the brain. So the brain is divided into right and left lobe, and each lobe has 4 important areas which are called the frontal, which is the front, occiput, which is the back, and the side you have the parietal in the front, temporal at the back. So this is on both sides of the brain. So in these areas, the outer portion is called the grey matter and the inner part is called the white matter. So this grey matter contains a maximum number of neurons, and these neurons get sharpened and also go through the process of pruning so that the efficiency with which they function improves dramatically, and this change happens during adolescence. The sulci and gyri of the brain, which is the creases and folds, they also increase in depth and numbers during adolescence, which helps to give more space for the specialized neurons to function in a particular way. And in this process, the brain, which appears very dense with lot of neurons on the surface at the age of 5 to 6, slowly start toning down, and by the age of 18 to 20 years, you see a less dense grey matter which covers the surface of the brain. And why this development is very important? Because as an adolescent, you will be multitasking. You have to study a lot of portions compared to what you were doing before. You have to perform actions with more acuity. The speed has to increase. Memory has to be enhanced to learn more, and also the emotional changes which take place is more during adolescence than any other stage. So for all these things to happen, this pruning process helps. So does this maturity of the nervous system happen at all parts of the brain at the same time? The answer is no. And this is the reason why we will be able to understand the way adolescents behave. The emotional center of the brain is called the limbic system. The limbic system is situated at the floor of the brain. It comprises of structures called hypothalamus, the pituitary which we saw, pineal gland, amygdala, mammillary bodies, and so on. So all these structures together form the limbic system. So the limbic system matures much faster compared to the frontal cortex, the front portion of the brain, which is involved in analytical skills, high order thinking skills, decision making, abstract thinking, and all these functions mature a little later compared to the limbic system. And this is the reason why as an adolescent emotions overtake wisdom. So when your parents tell that you should not take a vehicle before the age of 18 years, even though you feel confident that you can drive a car or a bike like your parents, but yet the license is issued only after 18 years, and you are given a right to vote also only after 18 years. Why? Because the limbic system maturity happens faster, so most of the decisions taken by adolescents are emotionally derived compared to the frontal cortex, which matures a little late, and that is the reason why we have to restrict our actions based on this risky age group behaviors. So, understanding this maturity of the nervous system helps not only the adolescent but also the people who handle them, because now we know why their emotional system matures early and why they behave so that they show a lot of emotions, and each and every day we have to face the emotions of an adolescent like frustration or anger or little bit of violence when it comes to boys, or in girls they go into low moods or a low self-esteem or depression. So all these things take place because of the maturity of the emotional system, the limbic system, which happens much before the higher order thinking skill center, which is the prefrontal cortex. Having understood this, what are the points which we have to spend a little bit time to understand the behavior of an adolescent? So if we take the statistics, the risk-taking behaviors are very high during the phase of adolescence, whether it is boy or a girl. As we saw, car accidents or accidents which happen at home or outside is maximum seen during this phase, because they develop the confidence that they can do every work efficiently, but at the same time the risk is always there because of the lack of maturity fully of the thinking center of the brain. Same way in girls, unprotected sex can lead to teenage pregnancies, which can pose lot of problems to the girl child. And sexually transmitted diseases again are very common during adolescence, and this is the age group when behaviors like smoking or drinking or use of illicit drugs, all these things start during adolescence, which we have to be very cautious about. And understanding the function of the brain of adolescent helps you to keep yourself away from such behaviors which will pose risk to your body, and not only to you but also to the people around you at home or at school and the surroundings. And this is the age when instant gratification is needed for every task which is done by you, because the reward center in the brain is so functional during this phase, and you slowly move away from parents, and peer influence becomes more important, because all the peers are also going through the same changes like you, and whatever decisions they tell you or they want you to try along with them, it matters more to you because it appeals to the emotional center. So a word of caution here, that whenever you are trying something new which your friends tell you or people around you or the society tells you, please take 1 minute to think about it before making a drastic decision. Now, right, so having seen about the changes in the body and the brain, what are the health issues which are posed to an adolescent? The health issues can be divided as, the most important thing I would say is the tech dependency, which is very common in adolescents and also young adults. The emotional challenges which you face as an adolescent, and very important nutritional needs of an adolescent, and also the sleep cycle of an adolescent. So these are certain health issues where we will spend few minutes on each. There is a condition called problematic internet usage syndrome, which we call as PRIUS, which is very commonly seen in adolescents, because as you know, we are all in a technology dependent world, and we use the technology day in and day out, and without technology I don't think our life will move on smoothly like what we are doing now. But in the case of adolescent, education is also going through technology now. So you spend lot of time with your gadgets, and the time which you have to spend with your gadgets every day is supposed to be not more than 3 to 4 hours, but I am sure this is not going to happen. So how can we wisely control the usage of gadgets is very, very important as a personal discipline. So some amount of screen hygiene is essential for all of you to follow. So when you have class sessions, ensure that after 40 to 45 minutes of a class, take 5 to 10 minutes break when you don't sit and stare at the screen, but move away and look at something else, or wash your eyes and then come back to the class. So this will help your eyes to refresh. And second, the position in which you keep the gadgets is also important, which prevents the development of headache or backache or neck pains, which happens in very commonly in adolescents and young adults. And when we know that it is becoming little problematic, that you are not able to control the usage of internet or usage of gadget, and if gadgets are taken away from you, your mood changes, mood swings happen, and you start reducing your active communication with the family members or with the people surrounding you. That means you yourself have to understand that we are ending or going towards internet addiction, which definitely should be avoided so that your health is maintained normally. Coming to behavioral changes, the behavioral changes which you see in boys are a little bit of aggression and violence, and this happens because of the hormone testosterone to some extent, and also because of the muscular and the bony development which happens during this phase, which gives more confidence and amount of aggression which comes along with it. So we have to be very, very sensitive to these issues, and for this we have to maintain a right kind of attitude, a right peer group, and also discuss every matter with the parents, which becomes very, very essential so that behavioral issues doesn't take place during this phase. For girls, apart from this aggression or violence, depression is more commonly found in girls. So balancing life, whether it is a positive result or a negative result. Say for example, you are going through an exam and the exam results are not in favor, it doesn't mean that it is the end of life. So we have to maintain a positive attitude, and a self-confidence has to be boosted up. And for this again, developing good hobbies helps you to remain a balanced person. So spending 2 hours at least for physical activity is very, very important for both boys and girls, and developing some extracurricular activities, like it can be music, arts, or it can be indoor or outdoor activities, sports, etc., will help your mind to relax. And a good amount of sleep every day is very essential to recharge the brain, because as we already saw, lot of tasks have to be accomplished during this phase of adolescence. So minimum 8 hours of sleep is essential for every adolescent, whether it is the next day exam or it is a normal day. Ensure that you get adequate sleep so that your brain will be recharged and stress can be avoided. Substance abuse is a very common thing which we face as pediatricians also nowadays. We were always thinking that substance abuse is not very common in India, it is more commonly seen in the Western world, but it is not so. It is also slowly catching up among the urban adolescents. So we have to, as we saw, we have to think before we get into any kind of habit which will harm our body. So substance abuse is a kind of self-harm, but later on we can also, under the influence of the substances, cause negative impact on the society and our friends. So an extreme word of caution to avoid any kind of abuse, whether it is with substance or alcohol or smoking. Then coming to the nutrition, this is very important, vital for every boy and girl during adolescence, because this phase not only you reach your potential with regard to physical and reproductive changes, but also the ovum and the sperm, which is going to be the future generation, is also formed. So the impact of nutrition on a boy or girl during adolescence impacts 2 generations. So what kind of nutrition should be taken during this phase? Let us take a plate. This is called a food plate, and the food plate should have 50% of fruits and vegetables. So 50% of the plate should have fruits and vegetables, and these fruits and vegetables should be of different colors, because the nutrition varies from one fruit or vegetable to another. The rest 50% of the plate should have multiple grains, and we always prefer whole grains compared to polished rice or wheat, because the B complex vitamins are lost when we take a polished rice or wheat. Proteins are very, very essential, because we know muscle development and fat deposition is happening in boys and girls during this phase, which requires lot more protein than before. Dairy products are essential because calcium is needed for bone and muscular growth. So a mix of all the nutrients should be taken with every meal. As far as possible, let us try to keep away from junk, which is the more caloric value with less amount of nutrition. Maybe the taste might tempt you, but it is always necessary that you reduce the amount of junk you take and watch out on what you are eating with every meal. Coming to the details a little bit about nutrition, we divide the nutrients as macro and micronutrients. You know, macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins and fats, and the micronutrients are the vitamins and minerals. So the carbs should occupy 50 to 60% of your energy needs, and 20 to 25% should be proteins and less than 20% from fat, of which we prefer the polyunsaturated fatty acids like DHA and keep the saturated fats to less than 10%. And when it comes to the micronutrients, the effect of deficiency of micronutrients is not very drastically seen in our weight or height or in our structure. But what happens? Hidden hunger is the term which is used for micronutrient deficiency, because the effect of the micronutrient deficiency is hidden. Unless we go and search or test for it, we will not be able to identify, but yet it is going to show an impact on the brain functions and also hinder the development of sexual maturity or the potential height and weight of every boy or girl. So take for example, once the menstrual cycle starts in girls, the iron requirement increases. In the same way in boys, because of drastic muscular development, iron need increases. Calcium is essential in more amounts during this phase because of the bone and muscle development, and zinc is needed for the development of immune system. Iodine is essential for the secretion of thyroid hormone. So these are some of the examples for you to understand that micronutrients should also be taken in sufficient quantities so that the maturity happens during this phase smoothly. So now, as health, we know the definition of health, which not only considers physical health but also mental, social, psychological and emotional well-being of every person is considered as good health. So for this to happen during adolescence, we have to maintain a healthy lifestyle, and this includes a balanced diet, as we saw, exercise for 1 to 2 hours a day, which is common for both boys and girls, stay safe from accidents and avoid risk-taking behaviors which can cause trouble to the body, and also maintain a good sleep so that your brain gets recharged after every night's sleep. So these are some of the healthy lifestyles which as an adolescent you can adopt. So with this we have come to the end of this session on adolescence, and I wish every adolescent who is listening to this talk a very happy and successful life, and I wish also that you are the hero or heroine of your own story. Thank you.